to start, just kind of getting your perspective on your approach to communication externally when it comes to the development process. How much do you value it, and how does it get wrapped up in your plannings for getting the game out to the world?
Um, it is a big part of what we do. I think as a smaller team, we realize where we can have impact and maybe what's harder for us. And this team has been really cool at letting me be part of conversations or be a fly on the wall or start developing ideas about how we communicate very early on in processes. So like in the earliest phases of coming up with new contents, I am there and thinking about it and already trying to figure out what the concerns are or what's going to really resonate with players. Um, so that part's really nice, and I think that's sort of the benefits and maybe a pitfall of a smaller team of like is like we have less in-house people. We don't employ a PR team or anything like that, but it does mean that I'm like there hands-on, ready to like hear what's happening and then start formulating ideas to develop my comms. So most of my comms is the marketing for the game. We operate a lot through word of mouth and communicating through players to other people. So
And why is it important to be thinking about it that early? Because I would imagine there are some folks who think, that's an after the fact type of a thing. We need to wait until we know exactly what our game looks like and exactly how we want it to be played before we can communicate that to the world. Why is that not in your sense, based on what you just said, the right approach necessarily?
I think because that communication is like two-way, I
Mm,
think a person is mostly in touch with what's happening with games right now, who's paying attention to it, who's maybe talking to other community people or other marketing people or other comms personnel, they can bring information to your team that can help you avoid pitfalls or maybe avoid getting too deep into something that might actually not be that important to players. I work a lot with the team to just really boil down to the core what the thing is and why it's important. And it's really helpful, I think, for them. Like it can be really easy to get caught up in like, oh, someone's working on a very specific piece of thing and they want that to be the most important thing. And that isn't always what hits for the players. And I think with all of our comms, I try to boil it down to that core message and then
mhm.
use that to sort of expand. And so I think being there early means I can help at least inform what I think might be better for people or what might hit for players or maybe a concern that this happened yesterday where someone brought up something and I was like, "Oh, actually, here's a concern that players have been having about this. This would actually be really good for that. This might be a solution for that thing." And so that's stuff that's going to release in 5 months, but it does allow me to kind of like help shepherd or at least inform or give information that can help the team make good decisions.
How do you filter through the feedback that you are getting to know what is useful and what isn't? If you're going to stay true to the game that you're building, you're still opening yourself up to commentary from folks who might have suggestions that aren't along the lines of what you had envisioned. So how do you maintain your confidence and, well, this is what we're building, and still take in advice that might be important?
I think there's a couple things there. The first one is that any feedback that we get is important. It might not be important on the surface level. It might not be like, oh, the thing that the person said is exactly the thing that we're going to go implement. But I think anyone that spends their time reaching out to us, whether that's, being mad or being happy or in between, that stuff's all really important. And that intention that people have and that effort that they're putting in is important. So I think we try to take it all. It's impossible for me to answer every single question that we get asked, but I think um, we can look at sort of larger movements in communication and think about those. So I think knowing what we have and defining what we have internally and having a good understanding of that is really helpful. And it helps us filter through those comms and say, all right, well, this feedback, we're never going to action on it. It's just not a thing. It's never going to happen with our game. A good example of that is mods. We think they're really cool. We play a lot of games that are sandbox games that have mods. It just wasn't in the cards for us, and for multiple reasons. And we just, we kind of ripped the band-aid off and said, "Hey, this is just not going to happen. I'm really sorry. This would be really cool to do, maybe, but like, it's not in the cards right now for us." and it allows us to just like chop off a whole section of requests and feedback that we still hear and we think are important, but we don't have to necessarily go down that rabbit hole every single time someone asks about that because it's just not in the scope of what we're trying to do. So
What about being a nonviolent game? What kind of feedback and suggestions did you get in response to that?
yeah, I think that's a funny one because Astroneer, yeah, being a nonviolent game, choosing to be a nonviolent game, especially in the current landscape where maybe that feedback's not even only coming from players, that's coming from the industry, that's coming from people who are looking to promote the game. They're saying, "Hey, this is what everyone does. This is what people want." There was definitely a moment early on where that feedback was coming in and people were saying, "Hey, how come I can't find the space cows and shoot them with my space laser and then turn them into space meat that I can eat and stuff?" And I say that from the perspective of like crafting games. A lot of crafting games have like a hunger mechanic or like a stamina mechanic, and we just decided like none of that is a thing for us. Even though we're getting that feedback, we are gonna stick to our idea for what the game is and what we want it to be at the end of the day. So we then created comms to explain why, and like we always mention that we always are keeping that sort of back of mind whenever we're talking to people because the other thing we think about is like there's big phases of the game where you know we could do a big summer sale and we sell a lot of units, and that's actually like an entirely new audience who has no context from the previous portion of our development. They weren't there for early access. They didn't watch all the streams where I explained all the things, and so um, we try and like maintain our core messaging always through as we've been turning into more of like a live game.
So when you're talking about engaging with the community, how important is it to dive deeper into the feedback that you're getting? Because on its surface, it might be feedback about fixing something, but then how important is it to really say to yourself, what is this really about? What is this feedback really about?
Yes, this happens all the time. I think it's a common because, like I mentioned, we did early access. It is you get a lot of people who really want to put their thing into the game. They want to be a part of the process. They want to tell you what to do because they think uh, they have a really good idea, and I love that passion. Um, but a lot of times we have to take that intent and kind of put it through some process and filters in order to see what at the end is is the most actionable thing for us. Because sometimes people have great suggestions, like um, it would be great to add certain features to the game, but we have many internal reasons why that can't happen. We are a nonviolent game. The way we, built our technology doesn't allow for that thing, and there could be any number of those things. Um, so I think a lot of times we try and break down, just like I mentioned earlier with like our core messaging. I also try and like filter the messaging from the community and kind of get to the core of what that intention is. Um, an example of that is we used to get a lot of feedback about dedicated servers and hey, how come your game doesn't have dedicated servers? Why is that a thing? Why is that not a thing? And when correlating that with like Steam reviews and comments, it was actually not. It was less about dedicated servers, which I think are a cool feature, and it was more about like our multiplayer at the time didn't run very well. We
Hmm.
started doing a whole bunch of benchmarking to say like, wait, where is this feedback coming from? Why is it? Oh, it's because there's a bunch of crashes in this specific instance, or when certain people join the game from because we have peer-to-peer multiplayer, we don't have any server infrastructure at all. So if someone joins a game from Italy and the other person's all halfway across the world, it actually just runs poorer because of their connection issues. So um, we instead said, we were like, all right, cool. Well, dedicated servers, we get that that's a thing. Let's put that on the backlog. Let's maybe see if we can do that later. But the core idea here that impacts most players is multiplayer being an issue. And because we are a small team, we have to think in those regards. Like, yes, dedicated servers are really cool, but what's actually going to make the most impact for the entire player base or for a good portion of them? So it's sometimes hard to do that, but I'm glad we take the time most of the time to like really filter through and think about it, and then also try and come up with solutions that can cover multiple problems or address multiple things. Like we kind of have to do that, otherwise we'll impact less players. It's just like not helpful when we have a smaller team like ours.
What are some of the ways in which using Steam tools for communication has had the biggest impact or that you have found to work the best for you? And what advice do you have for other devs who are starting their process with that?
Um, well, a lot of it we talked about, but I think it's important to sort of reiterate. It's like using using Steam tools, and this is sort of a philosophy that we think about. I'm sure other developers are thinking about it too, but like use the Steam tools to communicate with people, but don't use the like think about your users' time and take that and, you know, take that to heart and think about that. Um, I really like the way that y'all have separated out how you communicate with players and be able to choose, hey, this is just a small update versus, hey, this is a major update, and having those different categories. Um, that part's really cool because before that point, you would put out patch notes and it would go to every single player, even if it was just a
Mm,
hotfix, you know? Um, and that was good, but maybe annoyed some people, or it was hard to sort of decide when you wanted to post things because you didn't want to upset people or make them frustrated. So I think from the tools side, uh, I like creating really good art and then using the tools to kind of see where that stuff pops up. So I spend a lot of time like looking at analytics, and y'all have those cool flows where it shows you like, hey, the people that landed on your store page came from this area on Steam, and then like then digging into that and thinking, all right, well, if I'm actually showing up on the tags page for automation, which I really want to because that's a good tag page. Um, what does my art look like on there? Does it fit? Does it maybe I want to adjust it for this time frame? Maybe I want to make it look better because actually that the tags page means it's smaller art because there's a big list. Um, so I think the combination of announcements and then also analytics is like really helpful, and it forms this loop that we are constantly thinking about. Like, where is the art showing up? What does it look like? Making really good art, making custom art for lots of different instances. Um, and the fact that we have a lot of control over that's really helpful. And we spend a lot of time working on
what are some other things outside of Steam tools that you have found to be the most effective in your communication?
that. The idea of advocates has been really helpful for us. Like I'm a now two-person comms team with a community manager, but for the most of our development, was just me working on all this stuff. And I just can't get everywhere. Even if I try to, if I make a list of all the places I should go, forums, Reddit, Twitter, Instagram, all the places that we communicate with players, I just can't get there every day. And we're getting lots of requests and lots of people talking to us. One of my favorite places to visit is like a Facebook group that we don't run. It's like community run, and there's lots of conversations happening in there. Um, and so what we try to do is because we did early access really early on, we were like, we're going to bring people into the process of how we make our games. And it helps in two ways. One, it's just like human. It's like people see us, they watch us work, they understand that we're there and we're trying to make it happen, and it takes down that sort of curtain, which can be a little scary, but mostly it's work for us. Um, and then secondly, it better informs people to why we're making decisions. And a lot of times, like I trust that most people see that stuff, and even if they are not a game developer or even if they're not a super technologically attuned person, they are still going to understand the message, which is, hey, we want to do this. Here's the reasons why, and we often see and I love seeing people taking that and putting it back out into the world in a way that I just would not be able to do. It's that's like the successful moments for me when I see people saying the thing that I said on a stream 2 weeks ago to tell someone else that a feature's coming and explaining why it's going to take a little longer, or why we delayed our release date or something like that. Um, and so I think we spend a lot of time curating the message that we have, trying to make sure that it's a digestible thing that people can understand, and then putting it out there so that way people can then take it and ferry it around and show other people the thing, which is really fun.
You mentioned that doing that helps you to see what's working because you can see that they're repeating your message. Are there times that you have found that's more of a learning moment where are they repeat something and you think, "Oh, that's not quite what we wanted to get out there." I mean, have you ever been able to use that for the opposite to teach you what doesn't work?
Yes. I think yeah, so I love the successful moments that where that happens, where people are sharing those cool things, or they're sharing the clip, or we have a lot of like commands in chat, and we have a lot of like Reddit posts or forum posts or stuff where I will communicate something and lay it all out there, and then people will then just share that article or that post or whatever. But that has also worked against us. When we launched our 1.0 product, we added like EULA in game that had a lot of jargon about, information and how it flows to us. And we're trying to be very, we're trying to like graduate from being a small indie company who's like, yeah, we kind of know things, to like, hey, we're gonna maybe check in and make sure that like things are working all the time, or that like if you crash, we get some data for you from you so we know. Um, that's all that was for us. It's like, hey, is the game working? Is when it crashes, do we get information from you? And we put out our EULA, and we didn't explain all those things, or we did, but we didn't necessarily fully expect people to like dig into every single line and look at it, and we didn't necessarily filter all the way through it. So we had like some concerning conversations that popped up, where we had to kind of say like, hey, listen, totally get why you would think this. Very valid point. I'm glad you called this out. This We're not farming your data on your computer. We're not like
Right, right. Don't worry.
um yes, but at the same time, here's why it's important that we know that you crashed. Here's why it's super important that we know that you achieved the thing in the game, so we could grant you the reward that correlates to that. And that was a learning experience for us. It was definitely a thing where we had to be like, all right, cool. This is a topic that is kind of top of mind right now. We should be very careful and very, very, very open about how we discuss it, because um, I totally get why people would be concerned about us going through their computer and seeing things, which we can't do and would never do. So,
It sounds like a lot of what you're saying on each of these topics has to do with, you mentioned being human and staying genuine. Why is it so important to stay genuine and not see it as this glossy communication piece that you put out into the world? Why is staying human so important?
um, the human side of things for me, like my background is in like telling lots of stories. I try and focus on that when I'm doing things, and it's no different with this project. Like when I started at System Era, I had never worked on a game before, and so we started doing vlogs from the studio, where I was literally bringing the camera around and filming people at their desks, or having them explain things to me that I just didn't know myself. Like I would be learning alongside of the viewer. And I thought that that's actually a really cool thing, because most people are want to learn with us. And so I kind of like took people on that journey. And it created this really cool situation where I got to step into the player's shoes and try to explain to them the things that are maybe really complex about video games. Um, it created this trust over time, where people understood that, like, hey, we're making these decisions and we're making them for players, and here's exactly why we're doing them. But it also created these fun moments where, like, people on our team got to put themselves out there and feel more comfortable talking about the things that they do. I look at it as like another opportunity for people to grow in their own roles and feel very excited about the work they do. And um, a good example is our animator Gene. He's a super awesome dude. Love him. He sits next to me, so I end up shooting a lot of footage of him just because he's right there, and he's always working on really cool, fun animations. And when I first got to the studio, I asked him to record something, and he was like, all right. He was like a little timid about it. And then over time felt really comfortable to come on streams and show off his work. And I think those kinds of things are hard to quantify. I can't put a number on that, but having people be invested in our team and having people see us grow as humans is a thing that you can't really buy. You can't really like do a marketing spend on that. And that took time to build, which was really fun. And I think to this day, we get lots of people who ask about where's Gene, or ask about the cool thing that this other person was working on in a vlog, even though it was really technical and really nerdy, and like an engineer was talking about relevance or something. That that's really cool to me, and I think like I said, it speaks to a side of marketing and comms that like you can't just go out and spend some money on.
And we're almost out of time, but I do want to circle back to something that you did touch on before. But I'd love if you have any examples that you want to share, talking about how even if you're a smaller development team, there are ways in which you can enlist the community to help amplify your messaging and help amplify your communication. Do you have examples of that or any other thoughts that you can connect with other developers who might be saying, look, we're small too. I don't know how we're going to prioritize this at all.
Yes. I think the advice I would give to developers is to, and this maybe wraps all the way back to the beginning point, which is to really spend time thinking about what the players are going to be looking at and what they're going to be seeing and what they're going to be experiencing. And once you know what that is, or once you kind of have some ideas about that, which, you can't really ever know until things get put out into the world, but spending some time thinking about what that thing is and kind of taking yourself out of that, which is hard, right? Like, um, if I'm a person on a four-man team and I've worked really hard on a feature and I want it to be prominently featured, um, that might not help me when I'm actually doing my marketing or actually doing my comms. So I think focusing on that to start is really important. And then once you work out from there, you can start to create and talk about those things and be okay with talking about those things. I think a lot of developers get really nervous bringing people into the process, because they're worried that they might make a mistake or they might say the wrong thing. And I think, um, understand what you got in front of you, take time to do that, and then be okay with sharing why and how, when you think you have the time to do that. I think, you can't just like create a marketing blitz around obscure technology, that you're making for your game. But I do think that if there's a really cool feature in your game that's important to you and you think it's going to be important to your players, that sounds like a really cool thing that you should be sharing with the people who might buy your game, and talking about why you think it's cool, and maybe even pulling back the curtain a little bit. That's worked for us, and it's made people feel like their investment in the game is more than just playing the game. And I think that's a big part for us. I talk about this all the time, like giving people ways to be fans of your thing outside of just playing it is really cool. And that's how you create those engagements with people outside of the game and create those advocates who are really willing to go to bat for you. Um, and that's one way that we did it. We decided to bring people into the process and make them feel like they could participate, and be a fly on the wall. And they, I think, subsequently returned that cool, return the favor to us and say, hey, I'm going to advocate for this thing because I actually believe in it. And now I understand why. And I like talking about why they made the decision or why they chose a feature or something like that.
That's all great. Is there anything else that you want to add that you think would be helpful that we haven't touched on?
I maybe a blanket statement. I think about comms early. Like I've mentioned a couple of times, but I think it's so important. It's I've seen, and this is not even just about games, like any creative project. If you're not thinking about how you're gonna bring it to people and how it's going to hit with them and what's going to be important to them, then you're missing out on a big part of actual game development that I think is really important. So, um, think about what ways you're going to be communicating. Think about what platforms you're going to. Don't be afraid to narrow that scope if you're a smaller team. Like Astroneer was basically built as a brand on Twitter by sharing gifts of the game during development. And like
Mhm.
that's all they did. They just focused on making cool stuff, sharing some cool stuff with other people, and that's not a that's not a formula to make a popular game. But I do think the idea behind it, which is focus on what you have, um, and think about it early on, and maybe even use that period to show off some things and see what hits. That's a good time to figure that stuff out. So think about comps early. That's what I would say.
Awesome. That's really super helpful. Thank you so
No
much.
problem. Thanks for all the insightful questions.